If you think about women essentially being like children, they make a lot more sense. And from a biblical standpoint, the Bible calls them the weaker vessel. We're called earthen vessels. We're made out of dirt. A vessel is like a pot. So you can think of our bodies as essentially being like a pot that holds our soul, essentially. And the Bible calls them the weaker vessel. So, their bodies are weaker. Well, what is the body made out of? Or what does the body control? Well, your body your brain controls your intelligence, your thoughts, and your emotions. And, your muscle and your brain and your muscles work together for strength. And of course, you've got lung capacity and all the rest of it. So essentially, women are physically weaker, obviously, but they're also emotionally weaker. And you can see that a lot. Women throw temper tantrums all the time. If you think of them, if you want to make sense of women, the emotional side of women, just think of them as being like kids throwing temper tantrums, or kids when they're happy that they go to McDonald's or something like that. The emotional state of women has more in common with children than it does men. And the intellectual side too. I know IQ varies, but once again, if you're the weaker vessel, in what contexts are you weaker? Once again, the vessel is the body. Your brain is what thinks. So they have to be intellectually inferior to men, even though it varies from man to man. I'm not saying you can't have a man with an IQ of 80 and a woman with an IQ of 140, right? But if you think about them as having more in common with children, especially emotionally, then they just make more sense. And it makes sense because the Bible calls them the weaker vessel. So you have to ask yourself, in what context are they weaker? It's obviously that they're physically weaker, even though you have some men who are, scrawny, and some women who are muscular and bodybuilders. But once again, just think of them as having more in common with children because they're called the weaker vessel. Just stop and think about that for a second. Why would God say they're the weaker vessel? In what contexts is their vessel weaker? And that will really help you understand women, especially when they throw emotional temper tantrums. They're just doing weaker vessel things because they have more in common with children than they do men. That's why men are supposed to be leaders and leaders of families. That includes your wife and your children.